Explore a little bit. So just so you know, I know like if you've been following my art for a while, you probably haven't seen me drawing a ton of backgrounds. Not that I can't. It's actually how I started doing my work. I got better at characters over the last 10 years or so because that's where the money was for me. However, to give you an example of some of the backgrounds that I drew before in the past, this is like a city shot I did. No 3D, just drawing. Um, Here's another city shot, right? Here's another crazy city shot I did. No 3D, all freehand. So you can see here, same, and then there's an interior shot. There's another interior shot. So this is from a book I was doing, the Death Junior comic book, that never got published because the economy tanked and it went under. So that's an example. So I want to talk about drawing backgrounds simply, right? Like you can get as complex with background art as you would like. Um, Obviously, you can get very simple. What we need to do first here is gauge. You need to gauge. This is something you have to do: is gauge how much of the basics do you know. So let's just do a little test practice here. All right. So case in point, if we have a horizon line, right, and we got 1 point perspective, and then we got sorry, Photoshop's being my hands aren't doing what I want it to do tonight. So then we got 1 point, 2 point, 3 point. I'll make a line, and then we're gonna do curvilinear. So I'm just gonna go over this quickly. So 1 point perspective is anywhere on a horizon line, you got one singular point along the horizon, and that means if we're going up here, and we got a cube, we would see the bottom of the cube, and that would be the side as it goes above the horizon. At horizon, it would just look like a square, and then below the horizon, it would be inverted. We would see the top of the cube, and it would go down, right? So that's 1 point perspective. Let me just edit, paste and paste. I just don't want to be drawing over these. Then we got 2 point perspective. I'll probably do that a little too close. So 2 point perspective is where we're using 2 points on a vanishing, 2 vanishing points on a horizon line, where we then see the bottom, but we see 2 sides. If it's above the horizon, at horizon, we're only going to see 2 sides, side A, side B. And then if it goes below the horizon, we're going to see the top of it, and again, 2 sides, side A, side B, but from the other angle, right? Things get more three-dimensional around 2 point perspective. 3 point perspective is the same as 2 point. Matter of fact, we can just take that, bring this down here, except one big difference, right? Is we're going to add a third vanishing point above or below the horizon line as well. So what does that mean? What that means is that we're projecting how do I say this? So let me make sure I say this right. Things look more dynamic at the like more scaled. So that means these how do I say this? So they taper. That's the word I'm thinking. Taper. So what that means is it's not going to work well with the thick brush. Is rather than 2 point where the line here is relatively stable, what it means is they're now going to get more dynamic. So they're going to taper as they get closer to the third vanishing point. See, so this, in this case, that means these lines are going to taper, third vanishing point, and then these are going to go back like this. It's going to look like this. And so it gets a little bit more dynamic, but it's a little bit of a camera trick, right? So you tend to see these a lot like in establishing shots. Like if this is like New York City, there's these really like dramatic angles of buildings that go like this. See, it's easier when I go a little bit more dramatic, I suppose. So you know you're in a third point vanishing point when the top and the bottom are completely different sizes. Does that make more sense? So above it would look more like this. Very dramatic, right? So like we're kind of looking through the floor. See, and then as it gets further along the horizon, it gets more dynamic, more dynamic. So here's the thing, very dramatic, kind of looks a little weird sometimes to me. Very popular in comic books like Spider-Man swinging through the city. So that makes a better explanation. The fourth term would be curvilinear. This is where things get a little weird. This is where you're trying to draw things through a camera lens, since cameras are ocular, they're circular, they're curved, lenses are curved, right? This is where instead of drawing straight lines from your two vanishing points or three vanishing points, what you're doing is you're drawing curved lines like this, curved lines, hence curvilinear. And then as it gets closer to, it becomes a mesh, and then it curve this way, curve this way. Same with the vanishing points, they're not straight, well they would be dead center, but they actually bow like this, and then they bow like that, all the way down to this point, right? So you can see things are curvular. Then within that little grid system, you can then do fairly dynamic things where you can have, a building look very, very dynamic. Very, very dynamic. Good for action scenes, not so good for straight storytelling. So good for pinups, good for some really great moments, but you don't want to do an entire comic with curvilinear. So what I do is I tend to lean on curvilinear and 2-point, fluctuating a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on how I'm doing things dynamically. And 1-point I don't use a ton of, but I will use 1-point curvilinear. So 1-point curvilinear can look like, this is where things get really weird, where I kind of make this stuff up, where you can bend things. You can bend things in real time is not even the word, but where you can dynamically start to bend things and warp perspective. Right? So that looks like anything to you. So these, these very basic things, 1-point, 2-point, 3-point, curvilinear, if you do them enough, it gets to the point where you don't, like you're doing them mentally a lot of times, you build what I call as a volume in your head. What you're really trying to do is see the page, the volume. This is a volume, the whole page, whatever canvas you're working on. You want to see it as a three-dimensional space. I don't see this as a flat piece of paper with a line on it. I see it as a three-dimensional grid, right, that goes into 3D all the time. This is really what you want to see. You want to get it so your mind sees this, not that. Right? Even though I'm drawing just like this and I'm working characters out, let's say I take a character and I, place them here along the perspective line, I'm seeing that in my head, right? And then as you get further and further into, the volume, you can start to see more dramatic and dynamic volumes. So when you're doing interior shots, you know, you could easily erase this wall and just draw this stuff. Delete that wall, keep this, and draw inside the volume. Good for RPGs, you know, whatever, conversations, concept art. That takes a tremendous amount of practice. Fortunately, for all beginners, it's not like you have to sit at your desk and practice in that way. I practiced because when I was in college, I worked a full-time 30 to 40 hour a week job and went to art school. And so I had zero time for fan art. I wasn't posting my fan art on message boards. I didn't have a MySpace page at all. I completely missed all that stuff back in the early 2000s. What I was doing was constantly practicing perspective and drawing cubes and cones and grids, more complex shapes three-dimensionally. Now I'm blobbing this stuff in using Photoshop, but that's because I developed this technique of doing that years later. It was always just pen and paper. So you can do this stuff, you can get like a small little notebook and constantly be practicing just basic, let me just do like a 1 point, and then, you know, you can take objects, start with a cube, make sure you're rendering all sides, right? You like, well, not all sides, but you're drawing the surfaces too, so you can see them, and then you can add things on top. You know, you can add things on top. You can expand these little projects out and just get real creative in terms of like teaching yourself how to see things three-dimensionally, you know? And I never stick to 1 point. I constantly just veer off into 3 point and whatever. So that's me. Understand too that when you're drawing things in the real world, life doesn't really have a fixed horizon line. The horizon line is where you're looking. So if you look in life, the horizon is wherever the horizon is, but the horizon is wherever you're looking. So try to imagine that this horizon line might be the Earth, the curvature of the Earth, right, where the mountains are, but it's in relationship to the POV. The POV being you, the camera, whatever. It could be a three-dimensional little fake movie camera. It can be a person, right? So how does that matter? Well, what it matters is in life things aren't so dramatically rendered, right? You don't sit down at your table and things are popping off your table super dynamically and getting all, you know, like have you ever seen Death Note, the anime Death Note? They draw like when the guy's writing in the Death Note, it's super dynamic. That is artistic license. Vanishing points tend to go way off in the horizon in real life, you know, and our eyeballs are circular too, so they add something to it. So things are much more subtler in real life. Just look around your desk. Everything is fixed to a horizon line, but the horizon line is also perpendicular to where you're looking. So things aren't as dynamic. They go on a little bit longer. They go off the page is basically what I'm trying to say. So try to imagine that anytime you're drawing a comic book panel and there's interior shots, the horizon lines generally are going to be way off the page. Then you ask me, well, does that mean do you have to draw a horizon line way off the page? The answer is no, you don't. Even if you have the horizon lines off the page, all you need to do is just zoom into the page, is have a rough idea of where the horizon line is, and then let's just say I go and create a desk, right? All I need to do is make lines perpendicular to one another. So I know here, and then I know where center is, and then everything else goes into relationship to those lines. So if I was going to draw, you know, a waste paper basket here, I know that these are all going to be, let's just say this is a lamp. These are all in relationship to everything else. You know, it's subtle. So you want to use one thing to guide you to draw everything else. Once you have an anchor on your page, you can draw everything else just following things parallel is the word I'm looking for, parallel to one another. We could draw a low floor here and draw a chair. Super easy. So, and then the rendering of those desks and objects get as complex as you want, or the buildings as complex as you want after the fact. So if we're going to do a basic building setup here. For the sake of conversations, I'm just going to block in. Let me actually turn this to 100% because I don't like looking in percentages. This is where silhouettes for me help because I can quickly come in here and block in objects. So I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just literally just blocking in things where I think buildings could go and weird stuff, weird structures, and I'm just making this up. But I'm just keeping things parallel to one another. Maybe I'll make this more like a tower, right? So, and then I'll just turn the opacity down. And as a guide, we can just use that as a guide. You can print this out and do this on paper, right? Or you can use black markers or 50% markers and draw right over, or use regular markers and put a piece of paper and trace over it. Doesn't really matter. But you can start to work out the basic shapes of everything, the construction shapes fairly quickly. And then you can just duplicate parallel lines. So we'll go this way, and we'll go this way. Get the big pieces first. And we'll work out these sides. And this is going to be a process of iteration. This isn't going to be you just drawing it all in one shot. So don't worry about getting super specific. What you really just want to do is get all the pieces worked in and try to draw through when you can, so you know you're fitting things in appropriately, that they actually fit, and you're not just sort of doing this imaginary. We can make this a little bit more dynamic. We'll just shove this in here. So I know this piece actually fits in there. And then we can come here. All right. So, and you can use reference to draw from. You can use real world buildings and then do your own version of it, using your own perspective. But I'm literally, for the sake of this conversation, I'm doing something a little bit more dynamic. And the structure of it makes absolutely no sense. Just making it up. But you can see just using cylinders. I'm going to use a cylinder and a cone. We can create some very basic towers here, And just go ahead and block extra stuff in. So you can get the construction of it pretty quickly. Once you have that down, say you like that. So you're like, I think that looks cool. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. Let me lock that, turn that off. Oh, it didn't turn off. All right. Okay, there you go. So, all right, so what you can do is, you can do a few things. Let's say you wanted to make this a building face, right? That has windows, 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 windows. You can draw the windows and try to line them all up. That's possible. I think the easiest thing you can do, easiest thing to do here is to kind of get that shape appropriate width here, And then what you can do, create a flat plane and then design your windows flatly. Okay? And then you can take this, duplicate it, and take that and put that in the center. So do 3 windows each. And then we'll take those windows, kind of move them, duplicate, and we'll duplicate one more time. And then we'll take the original square here, and we'll just move that down a little bit to make it all even. What are we doing? I'm making a texture map. So a 2-dimensional texture map. And then I'll take a copy of that. So it's by itself. I'm going to go ahead and click this layer, and go convert to smart object. You'll see why. Once it's converted to a smart object, you can then hit the Control T, which is transform, and it will allow you to grab each one of these pins, these little pinpoints, and you can warp this texture map into perspective. See? And that texture map can get as detailed as you want. It's going to be flat, but it just gives you the complete guide for that already being done. I can duplicate that, and then it's a smart object, so it's not really, it's referencing the original image, so it's not going to, you can continue to warp this as you go through. See? Then you can come here and quickly get buildings figured out fast. So look, that's a little imperfect. You know, you can get very technical with the flat map and structure all out, make sure it's all even, and then when you put it in, great. Or you can be like me and be like, I don't care, I don't care. I can just turn that opacity down and paint. I could paint right over that as a concept painting. I could also turn the opacity back down, print it out, traditionally draw it, figure it out all for real. Or I can just come in here and just use as a reference. And pop these little ledges out three-dimensionally, right? And draw the insides. So insides, three-dimensionally, this would come back. So you can see how you can take something very simple and start to build more complex pieces on top of that. Now, anytime, if you have a horizon line, anytime something is above the horizon line, you're going to see what's underneath it. Right? Doesn't matter if it's 2-point perspective, 3-point curvilinear. Anytime something is below the horizon line, you're going to see the top of an object. Right? So when you're looking at someone's art and you see even a character, let's say you see a character and you see the bottom of their chin and their neck is like this, right? And they're like, hey, check me out. Superman, right? You're like, yeah, we know this is below the horizon line. Whereas if we're seeing the top of his head, right? We're now looking below the horizon line, all right? Backgrounds are just that, but simpler. Characters just require a lot of different shapes stuck together being manipulated. Buildings are a lot of simpler shapes, so it's a little easier actually. Hopefully that helped. So if you have any questions or comments, just let me know. I will answer them. We'll probably end up doing a round 2, no doubt. So it's okay. No problems. Just let me know. Talk to you later. Bye.